Today we are here with my 2015 Mazda Miata Club. This is a HPDE street car, nothing too crazy. It's a very simple setup. We're going to go over kind of how I set it up, the parts that I used, coilovers, suspension, nothing with the engine really, interior seat, all that good stuff. If you watched my last video, we also have some new parts. You may have seen these sitting on the counter. Got some Phase 2 motor trend upper lateral arms. These are going to be to fix the camber in the rear. Currently it has too much camber, and I have maxed out the eccentric bolts, the factory alignment stuff, so yeah, need some aftermarket help with that. So with that in mind and all of that said, let's go ahead and get started. Up first, we're going to go over the engine bay. What do you need to do to prep your car for HPDE in the engine? And the answer really is nothing. Do your maintenance, change the oil, make sure you don't have any oil leaks, and really just look around, see what other guys with your car are doing as far as preventative items go. That's going to be your biggest thing. So with the NC Miata, for example, we have here a Moroso coolant expansion tank. That is because the factory coolant expansion tank degrades over time. It's made out of plastic, and it does have to hold pressure, and they are known to explode and cause the car to overheat really quickly and damage the engine. So for my car, that was a very particular specific thing that needed to be done before I could track this car, safely. Everything else, completely stock. There's a drop-in filter in the intake, just because I bought it, threw an intake filter in it. Why not? Do a little bit of maintenance. But other than that, oil. I just run Mobil 1 oil. I think recently I've started picking up some Valvoline stuff, just from a lot of good reviews on that. General internet commentary about Valvoline. They seem to be putting a lot of work in recently on doing new oils. There's actually some Valvoline Restore and Protect sitting on the shelf right now for the Lexus hanging out in the background. It needs an oil change. So yeah, that's it. Just change your oil. Make sure you don't have any leaks. If you have any very specific preventative items or maintenance things to your platform that need to be done, make sure you do that. If you've got a timing belt that needs to be replaced, if you are not sure when the water pump's been replaced or anything like that, make sure you take care of those items first. You don't need strut bars, you don't need headers, you don't need a big cool intake. All of that stuff is a lot of fun to do and add on to a car and make it look cool. And I'm not saying you can't do those things, but just know that if you're on a budget like I am, you don't need to do those things. This car runs great just as it is. It's a Miata. It's not going to make a bunch more power. I could put a tune on it. Fab 9 does a really nice tune for these things. It's supposed to help throttle response and a couple other things. So yeah, I'll probably do that at some point, but the car drives fine without it. So that's all I've been doing. While we're here, we could see it. You could see the brake master cylinder. You need to do brake fluid. So being on track is a lot different than being on the street. You are going to get your brakes a lot hotter than they really were probably ever intended to be from the factory. So you need a fluid that will stand up to that. So you will want to use something like Motul RBF 600. That's what I use. It's high temp brake fluid. It's not as worry-free as something like a standard off-the-shelf brake fluid. They tend to collect moisture a little bit more, so you may find yourself wanting to bleed your brakes a little more often. I just generally do it before every track day. I'll get a bottle and I'll run through each corner, make sure there's no air bubbles, and just bleed it until I see clean fluid come out. Yeah, that's super important. What else do we got here? Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, do your maintenance, make sure the engine's going to hold up, make sure you're not leaking oil, especially older cars. There's Most owners, especially if you just bought the car, a lot of people don't really do a lot of this stuff. They kind of skip over it and don't really think about it, unless something breaks, and then they might get it fixed. So yeah, just look over everything, top off your fluids, check all your fluids, flush the systems that need to be flushed. If your coolant, if you're not sure on that, flush the coolant system, flush your power steering, your brakes, flush all that stuff out, get it nice and fresh, and just get ready to be on track. With that, that'll be the engine. Let's move on to interior and go from there. So, interior items. What do you need on the interior of a HPDE car or something that you want to take to the track? And once again, the answer is not really a lot. Some people may find that the factory seat doesn't hold you at all. Basically, the Miata seats, you can see the passenger is very flat. There's not a lot of bolstering on the sides. The driver's seat's pretty much identical to that one. So I opted for a fixed back seat. There's a lot of caveats to putting a fixed back seat in a car. You really should have a roll bar, should have harnesses. You really shouldn't use the factory 3-point belt because of the high bolstering on the sides. The seat belt kind of lays on top of it instead of meeting your waist on the side. So I can't fully recommend doing this. It really just comes down to what organization that you're going to drive with. You need to check their rule book. They may have rules against doing something like this. So check with them, make sure that they're okay with it before you go and spend, something like $1,000 plus, a few $100s on seat rails, installing that in. I will say it will massively help to have a seat that will hold you. If you are not spending half your time on track trying to hold yourself into place, you won't be as sore, you can concentrate more on driving, and it really, really helps. But again, make sure you're doing it the right way, make sure you're checking with the organization that you're running with, all of that good stuff. The only other thing I've really done in here is the shifter. So I like tall shifters. The reason being is if you watch in-car footage of like rally or some of these other motorsports, you will definitely see that the shifters are quite tall. And the reason for that is as you're driving, you got your hand here, and you need to make a shift, the lower you have to reach down to grab that shifter and the shorter that shifter is, it makes it a lot more difficult to kind of make that one easy, quick motion. So I like to run a tall shifter. It's just a shift knob from Supermiata, a little bit taller than stock. The stock would have sat down closer to here, and now we're up a little bit higher. So as I'm shifting, it just makes grabbing that a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. I don't have to reach as far. A good phone mount. So this is a quad lock mount. This is what I run. Shout out Gears and Gasoline for tricking me into buying this stuff. It's it's super nice, but yeah, they definitely sold me on it. It is great. It's a great phone mount with the case and everything. It really helps. I can throw my phone right here, have a short cable to plug it in to keep it charged during the day while I'm driving. You don't want a super long one that's flying around everywhere. Just get as short as you can. And I run all, lap times, lap data on that, so I can kind of see where I'm at. I'll try different lines on corners, different shift points, and see which one kind of nets me a better lap time. Starting off, don't worry about something like this. Put your phone away, listen to your instructor, focus on driving, learning the track. You're going to need to learn corner stations, and there's going to be a lot of information coming at you really quickly. So don't worry about lap times your first track day, probably not even your second or third. You really just want to get used to being on track, driving in a manner that, if you haven't done track days before, it's going to be very different than driving on the street or even doing autocross, for example. So yeah, just make sure that your cockpit is free of loose items. This will all be covered probably in your tech inspection sheet, but, make sure all your items are secure. If you have an airbag system and you're using your factory 3-point belts, make sure your airbags are working, make sure all of that's good. All that good stuff. Just be comfortable where you're sitting. You may want to consider a seat at some point, but I would say for your first track day, just go out, drive it, see what you think, and then from there, maybe you can look at the rule book or the tech forms, the rules, everything, and see, can you fit a different seat into the car? Maybe there's some really good factory options that you can pick up secondhand that have more bolstering and everything like that. But other than that, that's pretty much it. You will have to remove your floor mats if you have them. These are in here. I take them out whenever I'm going on track. That will also more than likely be part of the rules. Make sure you have a rear view mirror. You know, you can see people that are coming up behind you. You'll have to get used to doing point buys. And yeah, other than that, very simple. Nothing big here. Just a little quality of life thing for me on the shifting, and then a nice phone mount so I can see all my lap data. So remember how I said you don't need to do any performance modifications to your car to drive it? Well, I did do one. I don't know that you could really call it much of a performance modification. This is just an axle back exhaust from Cobalt. The reason I run an exhaust at all on this car, A, because, you know, obviously cars sound cool, you know, it sounds faster, whatever. You know, everybody wants their car to sound cool. But I will say for the guys driving manuals, this is a really nice thing to kind of have, just because if you can hear the car, you can kind of rely on but audio cues on shift points instead of feeling like you have to look at your tachometer. And I find that, you know, even just a mild exhaust like this one really helps with being able to pick out, you know, you get used to what a shift point sounds like, where you want to shift, you know, if it's 7,000 RPM, 6,500, whatever. If you can hear it, you don't really need to look at the dash to kind of know when you're supposed to shift. It kind of just becomes second nature. You know, you can hear it, you can hear the point, you know it's coming, you go ahead and shift. Obviously on bigger straights and stuff, when you have some more time to relax, you can just give a quick glance down. But, you know, maybe you're at a track like Barber Motorsports Park, for example. It has some pretty technical areas where you may or may not need to shift depending on the car. And if you can just listen for it, it is pretty nice. So with that in mind, you know, yeah, you can do an axle back. You don't have to. Maybe there's something cheaper you can do, like a resonator delete. Plenty of cars do pretty well with muffler deletes. I'm not talking about U350Z guys. Do not do a muffler delete. It sounds horrible. Had it. Didn't have a muffler delete, but I've had a couple 350Zs. Please buy an actual exhaust. Yeah, listen for your shift points. Learn to listen to them instead of looking for them. It'll really help you out. It's less concentration you have to do on something else versus what's coming up in front of you on track. Next up, wheels and tires. So as you can see, I have two sets of wheels and tires. I have a street set of wheels and tires. These are just what I drive around on normally. And then I have another set of wheels and tires that I use for driving on track. These have a Hankook RS4 on them. This is a 200 treadwear endurance racing tire specifically. Do you need a 200 treadwear tire? Not exactly. If you're just starting off, something like a high performance summer tire, so these are the Continental Extreme Contact Sport 02s. I have a friend that runs these and he autocrosses with them and has a perfectly good time with them. Granted, autocross runs are pretty short, so they're not going to get near as hot as they would on something like a track like Barber Motorsports Park, Road Atlanta, you know, VIR, wherever you're at in the country, whatever track is closest to you, you know, pin that in. But something like this can be run kind of with a caveat in that you really have to keep an eye on the tires throughout the day. They are not designed to do, you know, 4 or 5 20-minute track sessions a day. That is a lot of work for these tires to try and keep up with, and you can run the risk of overheating them and damaging them. You can, you know, have chunking issues, delamination, just wear them out completely really fast. So keep that in mind if you're going to use something like a summer tire, like a normal just 340 treadwear, you know, 300 to 400 treadwear summer tire. You need to keep an eye on them, especially on the heavier cars too. Lighter cars like Miatas and stuff, I think usually those guys can get away with it a little bit more because the car doesn't weigh near as much. So that's where then you start talking about running something like a Hankook RS4, Continental Extreme Contact Force, the ECF, a lot of people refer to it. So this is a 200 treadwear tire. The RS4 and the Force from Continentals are endurance racing tires, meaning that they're really meant to last really long amounts of time on track. You can't use them forever because you will heat cycle them. So as you drive, the tires will heat up and then they'll cool down. That's a heat cycle. There's no direct number of how many heat cycles you can get out of something like an RS4. These tires really are meant to do stuff like 8-hour, 9-hour endurance events where they heat up and they stay hot pretty much the whole day. But you can heat cycle them a fair number of times. A lot of people will say that you will heat cycle these out before you ever run out of tread. And what happens in that is they start getting hard. They won't be as soft as they used to. They won't have as much grip, but you can still drive on them and they'll be okay. They just won't be as good as when you first bought them. Something like this is really nice, especially if you plan on running 4 or 5 track days a year. I've tried to do that much. I would love to do that much, but usually it's 1 or 2 a year for me. So these have honestly sat around probably more than they need to. But 4 or 5 track days a year, something like this is really nice. It's a good tire to learn on because it's not quite as sticky as what some people call like the Super 200s, these super sticky 200 tread wear tires that maybe are only really in their optimal range for 3 or 4 laps, 2 or 3 hot laps before they start falling off. An RS4 takes a while to heat up, but once you get it hot, you're fine. You can run it all day, no issues. Most of these tire companies have a hot pressure that they recommend. It still kind of depends on the chassis and how much your car weighs and stuff like that. But, I think Falcon, I want to say, recommends it's somewhere in like the low 30s. So, you'll start at maybe just whatever your factory pressure is, do your first outing, come back, grab your tire pressure monitor or tire pressure gauge, check the pressures, and I would say easy start off number, just keep it at whatever your factory pressures are supposed to be. So like for this Miata, it's 29 PSI. For a lot of cars, it's like 32, maybe 34. You can keep it there. I don't know that I would go much higher than 34, 35. That's already pretty hot on these things, or pretty high, I guess. But ultimately, having 2 sets of wheels and tires is very nice because it allows you to just drive your car normally, especially if you daily drive it. You have a set of wheels that, you can focus more on something like, these. I love the Sport 02s. I live in the South, so we don't really get freezing weather much here. Definitely, well, I can't say we don't get snow. We do get snow sometimes. It happens, but I don't drive this car. I've got a 4-wheel drive Toyota for that. So, if you live up north, or somewhere kind of in the middle and you need something that's going to do winter and everything, having a set of wheels and tires that you can keep on your car 95% of the time for your regular day-to-day driving is much more preferable than always trying to run a summer tire because you do, a few track days a year and then you have to live through having that summer tire through the winter. So yeah, if you can swing it, get a spare set of wheels and tires. These are nice, 17 by 9 RPF ones. It's a plus 45 offset for the NC with a 245/40 RS4 on it. If you can swing a spare set of wheels, I highly recommend it. It kind of just keeps you from having to worry about ruining the tires that you need to drive your car on, damaging them, whatever, from being on track. You can focus on just driving and, doing whatever you want to do with the tires that are rated for it. And then at the end of the day, take them off, put your street wheels back on, street tires, and you're good to go. So consider it. You don't have to buy fancy wheels. You can just buy a spare set of stock wheels. Get them on Facebook Marketplace, super cheap. Find what you can that'll fit. Throw a set of track wheels on it. Stock wheels are extremely strong. They're going to be great. I would actually probably take that over just like some really cheap like cast wheels. I say that's what these street wheels are. They're from Avid One or whatever that brand, however they pronounce it. But they look cool, so it's fine. But for your track wheels especially, get a nice wheel if you're going to buy aftermarket, something like an RPF 1. Koenig has a lot of great flow-formed wheels as well as Enkei. If you want to go big baller status, buy Rays, Volks, Works, whatever. Or, if you're not going to do that, get a stock wheel. Find the widest stock wheel or a wider stock wheel if you can. Maybe there's something from another car that'll fit your car that allows you to run a little bit bigger, wider of a tire. Yeah, go for that. If not, just get another set of wheels that, same ones that are on your car now, throw tires on those and switch back and forth when you need to. Very good. Let's move on to suspension. And for that, I'm going to put the car in the air so we can actually see it. I need to work, we're going to put the new arms in. And then we'll talk about the brakes too while we're there. So last but certainly not least, brakes and suspension. Past the purchase of the car, this will probably be where most people spend the majority of their budget modifying the car. So coilovers, sway bars, new bushings, new control arms, things like that all really do make a big difference once you start getting into tracking your car. You can make the biggest changes in setup or biggest changes in your lap times and how the car drives by focusing on this. I would say engine performance stuff, last thing on your mind. Again, to retouch on the previous point, just do your basic maintenance and any preventative items that you might need for your chassis. So on my car, I have some pretty simple stuff, nothing too crazy here. So we got a set of Feal coilovers. These are the Goodwin collab coilover that they did with Feal in the, I forget exactly what name they used, road race, club race specs. So that means that it has a 12K front spring and a 7K rear spring. So it's pretty stiff. This is not a super heavy car. I think these things clock in around 2,600 pounds. 12K and 7K is pretty stiff. What that does is it really tightens the car up a lot, especially over bumps and stuff. You can obviously adjust the dampening. These are 32-way adjustable coilovers. You'll have to watch some much smarter people's videos about adjusting dampening on track. It's something I'm still kind of working on getting good at and learning, and when to make that setup change or, you know, add more, take some out. But anyway, so let's take a peek, see what we got here. So these are pretty standard coilovers, nothing super fancy. They, you know, you can adjust up and down, set your compression length, your total length when the shock is fully compressed, and then you can set your ride height. So I am going to kind of complain about something for a second. Most people do this incorrectly. I've done it incorrectly. I did it incorrectly for years, not knowing any better. So most people assume that you will adjust the ride height with your bottom mount that's on your coilover. So you'll, you know, spin this around, change the length, and they're like, oh, don't mess with the preload. You know, whatever the company said, or, you know, it needs to be like a 1/8 inch preload or 1/4 inch. Yeah, I've learned the error in my ways and now realize that is not exactly how that works. So when you install coilovers, what you actually want to do, so say you get a brand new set of coilovers in, assuming these are not purpose-made coilovers for your car, like an example would be like the Zetas from Supermiata for the Miatas. They are a purpose-made coilover for this chassis. They don't use the shock cartridge that they use in like a bunch of other different, you know, brands and things, you know, cars that they sell the coilover for. It is specifically spec'd to work with that suspension that's on the Miata. Basically what that means is those coilovers don't have any or barely any adjustable length on the bottom. So they're pretty much fixed for the most part. They may have slight adjustment. I don't have a set, so, you know, take that with a little bit of grain of salt. But the main point is that you really can't adjust the total length of the coilover. So what that means is when the coilover fully compresses, so when your bump stop hits that top hat, it determines how long this coilover is when you're at limit of travel. So why would you want to change that or not want to change that? So when you are fully compressed at the full limit of travel and this coilover has completely bottomed out, the shock has completely bottomed out to the bump stop, you want to be in a position with your wheel and tire where you're clearing the main body. Fender liners, a little optional. You can tell that, let's see, there we go. Yep, we are missing a little bit in here from where I have rubbed through. So, you know, fender liner isn't really the good point of marking where the limit should end. It's really more like the actual fender, or maybe the, you know, if there's like body in here that you don't need to get into on the shock towers, stuff like that, the inner fenders. So the way you actually set your coilovers, get a brand new set of coilovers, take them apart and take the springs out of them. And what you will do is you will put it back together without the spring in it, mount the coilover in here, grab a jack, loosen, you know, disconnect your sway bar, loosen any bushings that would keep it from flexing. So usually your upper control arm bushings, lower control arm bushings down there. You know, this one, not so much because it's vertical. It doesn't move up and down. Loosen everything, jack this all the way up until it completely stops with the wheel and tire on it, and see where you're at clearance-wise. See if you can turn the wheel fully left and fully right without hitting anything. See if, you know, maybe you need to massage these fender liners and heat them up and kind of move them out of the way, or even trim them up, and see how you can get the car, you know, how low you can get it before it completely bottoms out. To adjust that, you're going to change this bottom mount. So if you need, you know, say the tire is stuffing way too far into this and you're not even all the way on the bump stop yet, you're going to want to make the coilover itself longer. So you would thread this down a little bit, extend the length of the coilover, and then check it again. See if, you know, all right, now am I avoiding making contact with anything that, you know, metal that can't be moved or shouldn't be moved. There's some metal, you know, back here behind this on this car, stuff like that. Once you get that right, and you know you get the most droop travel that you can get, full extension, and you get the most compression, or, you know, fully compressed, and you're clearing everything, you're not hitting anything, then from there, take the coilover out. If you need to take the bottom mount off, just make sure you mark it before you take it apart. You should be able to just pull the top hat off and slide the spring back on, and then put the spring in, put the top hat back on. From there, you will then adjust ride height with these two right here. Compression is a myth. These are linear springs, so they're not progressive springs. The spring rate doesn't change if you put a little bit of compression in them. You kind of just, it's a long thing. There's some guys that are much smarter about this than me, but essentially, don't worry about it. Like, you can change these collars and change the spring to adjust the ride height. Now, if you are setting your ride height and it takes you loosening this so much that the spring is then loose, that is why you will see helper springs on a lot of coilovers. So all that little spring does is, if you fully decompress the suspension, it fully droops, and this spring tries to come loose, that little spring expands and it pushes this spring up into the top hat to keep it on its perch. That's what a helper spring is for. It's not for, you know, ride quality or anything else. It's to keep this spring where it's supposed to be when the suspension fully droops. I would say I would probably need a helper spring on these realistically. The fronts, not so much. I think it was more the rears that it probably could have used a helper spring, but I managed to get them kind of set up and everything to get it working right. So you get your ride height set, you get your total coilover length set, so your compression is good. You get as much droop travel as you can get, because the suspension coming down and unloading is also important for maintaining traction when you're turning, going over curbs and stuff on the track, bumps. You get all that done, and then you want to check, you know, am I getting into bottoming out the suspension too much, which would be your car's too low. So easy way to do that, may be difficult to see, but there is a little red zip tie in there. That is a really easy and cheap way to figure out how your travel is doing. So you could take a measurement of your total travel by measuring, like right now the car's off the ground, it's completely unloaded. This is as long as this coilover will go, or as far as the shock will go. You can measure the distance between there and maybe the top of, you know, the inside of that top hat, or, you know, whatever. You find a point where you can measure. Oh God, the dogs are going at it. All right, now so the cage match between the two dogs is done. So find your total length of your piston when the suspension is fully drooped, full, you know, extension, and put a little zip tie in there, get a measurement, put the zip tie in, cut the little tail off, and set the car back on the ground and roll it around a couple times, you know, whatever. I wouldn't compress it too much, so don't like bounce it up and down or anything. And then pick the car back up again and look and see where that zip tie is at in your range. It should be pretty obvious. There's a lot that could go into exactly where in the range that you would want to be. You know, do you want more down travel than up travel? Do you want more up travel than down travel? It kind of depends. People that do suspension tuning for like performance, you know, real race cars, professional teams could really have a lot more to say about how that works. But the idea is that you really just don't, you know, your ride height doesn't need to be so low that you are 70-75% of the way through your suspension travel just sitting on the ground static. You know, if you're that low, realistically, you need to raise the car up a little bit to get your static ride height a little bit more closer to the middle of your travel than, you know, way higher up into it. So that's a quick kind of run through of how to properly set up a coilover. Obviously, there's, you know, much more to it than that as far as getting, you know, the travel right, all of this other stuff, getting the dampening right. But that's a quick run through of how you really should set these up. And then when you do left to right, just do one side and then match all the measurements. So measure the total length, measure, you know, all of these collars where you have everything, and just match the other side the exact same way. Don't worry about measuring fenders and all this other stuff. You really want to set everything equal. And the only reason you would deviate from that is if you're going to go and take the car and have it corner balanced, at which point they'll put, you know, the car on 4 scales. Each corner gets a scale, and changing the ride height on each corner will then change how much weight is on that corner, and they'll scale it left to right, front to back, you know, cross weight, stuff like that. You know, you need a performance shop to do that for you unless you buy a set of scales, in which case you could do it yourself. But that's just a quick run through and how to get these set up to give you the best outcome that you can just for, you know, the average person installing these in their garage. Next up on the list, for me at least, is adjustable end links. So these are Supermiata adjustable end links. The reason you want to do this is when you lower the car, your sway bar will no longer sit level at the static ride height. So when the car is sitting still, the sway bar will now be kind of tilted up a little bit because the car is now lower. This is to correct that. So you realistically want the bar pretty level, like where it comes around on the ends here. You want it pretty level. It's kind of hard to see because there's brakes and stuff in the way, but this sway bar here should be pretty level when the car is sitting still. So whenever you install these adjustable end links, you actually need to do it with the full weight on the car. I believe I jacked the corner up just under the knuckle here on the lower ball joint, and just picked the corner up and then adjusted it that way, since I didn't have a real good way to adjust the car with all 4 wheels on while it was sitting on the ground. But, you know, most of these companies have instructions on how these installed. Supermiata has great video on how to do this, linked on their website. So these are really nice. It kind of helps correct some of the suspension geometry from lowering the car, and is really helpful for just kind of sorting the car out. Another one I've got in here is stainless steel brake lines. This will really help improve kind of brake feel and can help improve performance on braking. You don't need to do these, honestly, at least not starting off. It's not a bad mod, and they're usually pretty cheap. But it just helps with the pedal feel because these are stainless, you know, braided lines. They don't bulge and flex as much as your factory rubber lines do, which usually will result in better brake feel. It feels kind of more predictable. It's easier to modulate the brakes. Simple upgrade if you're going to be bleeding fluid and maybe you want to go ahead and replace your brake lines anyway. You know, maybe you have an older car and the brake lines are, you know, the originals. This isn't a terrible upgrade. Like I said, they're usually pretty cheap. Just look for a solid, reputable company that has them, and pick a set of those up, throw them on, then bleed your brake system. And then, speaking of the brakes, do you need anything fancy for brakes? Kind of. So when it comes to rotors, these are just centric blank rotors. You can get them off Rock Auto. They're super cheap. Tons of people run these rotors because they're well made. They don't warp very easy. You know, they're cheap, they're readily available, they're just a good rotor. You don't need drilled, you don't need slotted. I would actually specifically avoid drilled. They tend to crack when you get them super hot because of the way that process works. They are drilled after these things are cast and made, which ends up weakening the metal. So you can run into problems where, you know, between some of the holes, you'll actually start seeing cracks forming, and you'll need to replace the rotor. That, and they're just more expensive. You just don't need to spend the money on something like that. Again, especially if you're like me and on a budget, you know, you don't have all the money in the world just to throw at the car. There's no reason to grab slotted or drilled rotors, really, truly, especially starting out. Now, as you go further into driving on track and things like that, if, you know, you're driving tracks or a car and you're really starting to work the brakes pretty hard and you're running into issues where they're just getting too hot, and, you know, you've gotten better at braking and you're just struggling to keep these things cooled off, by that point you probably were already seen. But if you don't, you can get what's called a two-piece rotor. So it will have kind of the center hub area here, and it will have little, you know, bits that stick off to where a ring, the rotor itself, the outer portion of the rotor, bolts to that center hub. So it's a two-piece. This center piece will usually be something like aluminum, like a CNC aluminum piece, and then your outer rings, of course, are steel. That helps reduce a lot of heat. It helps them cool off a lot faster. And it makes them serviceable because you can just replace those rings instead of the entire assembly. Man, the dogs are really on one today, huh? So, yeah, rotors. Just get Centric. I like these. They're cheap. Rock Auto, you can get them pretty much anywhere. And they're nice. You know, don't spend a bunch of money on that. Last but not least, brake rotors. Brake pads. So this is another place where you'll spend a good chunk of money starting off. Off-the-shelf brake pads are not designed, OEM brake pads, they are not designed to do track driving. They get way too hot, they wear too fast, you can run into issues with them fading, you may lose braking entirely if something completely fails. It's just not a great idea. You know, for autocross and stuff like that, where you're not driving for a super long amount of time, it's really fine. And you can run, I mean, I guess you can run these pads. It's just not something I personally would recommend. So what would I recommend? These are from a company called GLOC. So very similar to Carbotech, if you've ever heard of them. As far as I know, they kind of come from the same people. However that happened, you know, I think they split up and went their separate ways. But currently on the car is their GS1 compound. So this is their street compound. It's a really nice street compound, works super well. I ran these at autocross last time I went, and they were great for that. I probably could have got a little bit more braking out of my other pads, but, you know, for just having fun in an autocross, these were perfectly fine for that. They don't dust a lot. They have great stopping power for a street pad. Awesome pad. And the key benefit to running GLOC's GS1 compound is that you can switch between this compound and their track compound without having to worry about like resurfacing the rotors or doing anything super fancy. You can just take these out before your track day, you know, get your car ready. So take these out, put your other ones in. I mark all of these like front right inner, front right outer, so I can just kind of put them back in the same orientation they were in, usually just with a Sharpie on the outside. But yeah, take them out, put your track pads in. I have a set of the R10 and R8 compounds somewhere in here, but I have another set of pads that are the track pads. Like I said, R10s for the front, R8s for the rear. I will put those in when I'm bleeding the brakes, doing everything else, my pre-track day inspections and maintenance, and the car will be ready to go. And you can, you know, I trailer the car now. You can drive the track pads on the street. It's not recommended. The company doesn't recommend it because they don't stop super well when they're cold. So if you're going to, you know, drive your car to the event, then just keep that in mind when you first start driving that day. Keep in mind that your brakes need to warm up a little bit before they really start working as intended if you've got those track pads in there. So that's pretty much covering brakes and suspension. I don't have anything else super fancy in here. I did have to replace the lower control arms recently due to these bushings in the back and the fact that these lower ball joints are not serviceable. You cannot remove that ball joint and replace it. You just have to buy an entirely new arm. So that was a maintenance item that I needed to do that got found out when I was getting the car lined as he was trying to turn the eccentric bolt under there. The bolt was seized the first time I went, and he could see how much it was just moving that bushing around, letting him know that, hey, that bushing's worn out, it needs to be replaced. And the car does drive better since then, so that's a big bonus on that one. Anything else? Not that I can think of. Got a cool club badge here. That's fun. You get that with the club package on these cars. Very simple setup, as I said. You know, just coilovers, some end links to fix that. We've got the stainless steel brake lines. We got pads. Have an axle back exhaust so I can hear the car a bit better. Coolant expansion tank, just because that is a problem item on this car. But like I said, yours may not need that. You know, maybe your car needs a bigger radiator because the factory cooling system just doesn't hold up to track use. Maybe you need an oil cooler or a transmission cooler if you have an automatic. You know, there's some things that your car could potentially need to be ready to run its most reliable at a track event. So just, you know, look around your Facebook groups for your car. You know, if you've got an A90 or A91 Supra, check with those guys, ask around. There's some car track days, Facebook groups and stuff like that. You know, maybe your local track has a Facebook group that you can hop in and say, hey, you know, I want to bring my car. Most people at track events are super chill, super nice, happy to help out, ready to answer questions. You're going to have an instructor on your first event. Typically, you should have an instructor. I wouldn't recommend going out and just blind driving. But yeah, you know, think about your seat. If you can improve the interior in any kind of way just to make it a little bit easier, you know, make sure you take all your loose items out. If you've got a spare tire and spare tools, you know, jack and stuff in the back, take all that stuff out. Make sure your car's not leaking oil, you know, brake fluid, coolant, anything like that. Do all your maintenance and you will be good to go. You know, show up with a good set of tires, good brakes, brake fluid, and that should be all you realistically need to get started. On the point about suspension, I will say real quick, you don't need coilovers. You don't need sway bars. You don't need any of that stuff realistically. The best thing you can do is go drive the car as close to stock as you can. So, you know, get your tires sorted, get your brakes sorted, get all your fluids and maintenance sorted, and just go drive the car. You will learn more about how the car drives and what the car really needs by going and doing your first event pretty close to stock than you would spending thousands of dollars and months of work building this crazy, you know, all arms and polyurethane bushings and, you know, tuned engine and all of this stuff. You will learn more and have more fun if you just take the car as close to stock as possible and just drive it, see how it feels. You know, see, maybe your factory suspension's pretty tight. For example, the new generation Civic Type Rs are extremely stiff right out of the box. So much so that, from what I understand, those guys are actually lowering spring rates from factory instead of raising them because the car is just overly stiff. So, drive the car, see how it feels, go to a track day, talk to your instructor at the end of the day and say, hey, you know, the car feels this way or does this thing, and how can I make that better? Most of these guys have cars that they built. You know, they've probably been doing this for a while. Definitely ask them. Ride with your instructors as well. You know, they should be able to take you for a ride in the advanced sessions. So ask your instructor, hey, can I come ride with you in your session? You get to see the lines firsthand, see how the driving works, you know, at a higher level. And you'll really learn a lot from riding with your instructor. It's one of the best things that I ever did on my first track day at Road Atlanta. It made way more sense after I rode with my instructor, and I was able to go much faster and have a much better time not being frustrated after I had done that. So, yeah, a lot of fun. Definitely do it. Highly recommend it. Don't forget about track insurance. It is available if you need to insure your car for the weekend. It's typically like a 10% agreed upon value is the deductible. You know, it's a good peace of mind, especially if you're driving, you know, a much more expensive, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 car, and you don't want to write that thing off because your insurance will not cover a track day. So there is insurance for that. You can go through Haggerty, Locked On. Actually, this was a sponsor for one of the Jzilla events, if I'm not mistaken. It may have been Just Track It, but Traction. They have an insurance thing, so it's tractionins.com. You can check with them. They can get you a quote on insuring your car for the weekend. All right, so that was a quick overview of the Miata. Got to see kind of how it's put together, the parts that I've used, what I think about doing certain things with your car when you're getting ready for a track day or thinking about doing one for the first time. Earlier in the video, I mentioned the arms. Need to get those put on. Thought I was going to do it this video, but this has already gotten pretty long after rambling about how to properly set up coilovers, properly air quotes. Somebody will probably correct me on that. But yeah, it's a little long now. We'll do the arms in a separate video. I'll make a shorter one, just putting those in. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I don't have like a ton of track experience. So I've driven Road Atlanta once. That was back in 2016. And then I did Barber a handful of times. I say a handful, three times, maybe 4 times in the 350Z that I used to have. And then I took a couple years off, bought a house, did some, normal life stuff, and then got back into it with the Miata. And I've done 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly, track days at Barber again with this thing. And then now I've got a buddy of mine that is getting into driving his Supra. Shout out Dave. So we are running autocross events for the time being. He's more comfortable doing that to get started, so I decided to join in on doing that with him. So maybe another video, I'll actually video the autocross event. I've got some short videos that I took from the last one, but nothing serious. So yep, there's a basic setup of a car. Just the main goal is to go out and have fun, have a good time. Don't need to spend every penny out of your paychecks to do this. You can do this with much cheaper cars. This one was a little more on the higher end of cars that I've owned. But yeah, just have fun, talk to people, ask around, talk to your instructors. You will need a helmet, so make sure you get one. Not a motorcycle helmet. So this is SA, is the governing body that handles helmets. You will need an SA, let's see, we're in 2026 now, so the 2015s are now going to be going out. They're good for 10 years. Most organizations will allow you to run a helmet as long as it's within 10 years. Every 5 years, those standards get updated and new helmets come out. So that's a 2025. You might be able to find a 2020 that's on sale or something like that, so you can save a little bit of money. RaceQuip is a really popular brand for kind of budget entry-level helmets. You can go with ZAMP, Z-A-M-P. They have some pretty cheap helmets as well that meet those regulations. They don't have all the cooler features that you might get with like mic plugins or ventilation or some of this other fancy stuff that you get when you spend more money on a helmet, but it'll get you started and you can run that helmet for a while before you even need to think about replacing it. A lot of autocross events will actually let you borrow helmets, and most HPDE events will generally have helmet rentals. So check with your organizer, look into that if you're trying to save money and really get into this, cutting it kind of close, or just not wanting to spend a lot on the upfront because maybe you're not sure if you want to keep doing it. Look at helmet rentals. Sometimes you can just rent stuff. But yeah, it's a fun car. I love this thing. It's a blast to drive. It's probably one of my favorite cars that I've owned. I've had Acura Integra 2nd Gen. I've had Fiesta ST, a 350Z that was set up very similar to this. That was like a street track car. I had a drift car 350Z, S13 240SX, and I think that was it. A couple trucks, other things like that. But so far, I think this has probably been my favorite. When it comes to, maybe you haven't even picked a car yet to do track days with, I would highly recommend getting something that is low power and low weight as much as you can. So if you can fit in a Miata, I highly recommend them. They're one of the greatest cars to learn, track driving in, and they're just a ton of fun all around to drive. If you already have something that's higher horsepower, Corvette, Camaros, Chargers, maybe Supra, Porsche, whatever, you can absolutely track those cars. It's gonna be a little bit more expensive. The tires are more expensive, brakes are more expensive. The heavier the car, the faster you will go through those wear and tear items. but you can still get them out on track and have a great time. Like I said, just make sure you do any preventive stuff. I keep hammering that, but it is important. You don't want to destroy your car. There's certain models of Porsches that will oil starve on I believe it's a sustained right-hand corner. You can oil starve those engines. There's cars out there that really need an oil cooler to stay cool. The 350Zs technically really being one of them. 350Zs benefit a lot from oil coolers because they tend to run pretty hot oil temp wise. So yeah, just think about it before you commit to a car if you haven't bought one yet. Lightweight and low horsepower will give you what we would call like a seat time car in the drifting world, I guess. It's a car that doesn't cost you a lot to run. The parts are inexpensive. The maintenance is inexpensive. And that equals more track time, more fun, just driving the car. So you can go fast in a Miata. You just, don't use the brakes too much because you'll slow down and it takes forever to get back up to speed. Momentum car, basically, is what I'm getting at. So yeah, next video, we'll put the arms in. Take this thing to get aligned, hopefully for the last time. I did offset lower bushings in the front. I actually didn't show that, but where the ball joint mounts into the knuckle, it actually has a metal sleeve that is separate from the knuckle that you can take out. There is a set of Supermiata offset bushings. It's called a bushing. It's solid metal, but it's offset to actually push the wheels out just a little bit further and get a little bit more camber out of them. I had also maxed out the front factory camber adjustment and needed more camber in the front versus needing less in the rear. So got that done, and I haven't aligned the car since. I did a string alignment with some jacks, and that was about it. And it mostly drives straight, but not straight enough. So get these arms in, get the car aligned, it'll be good to go. I have also a 8-hour race coming up with a couple friends of mine. One of them that owns a Lemons NB Miata. We're going to be driving that at a track called Mid Pond. It's like an outdoor go-kart track that's been converted into a drifting / track day, really cool track. Ken Martin, the guy that owns it's awesome. He's such a cool guy. Been going there for a long time, off and on. So yeah, we're going to go drive an 8-hour race. It was a max of 12 cars. I don't know that they filled that. Last I checked, I think it was only like eight teams that had signed up, but there'll be 3 of us driving the car, having a ton of fun. I'll probably do some video on that. I don't know how much I'll video, but we'll see. Maybe I'll do a separate video on that. So yeah, leave a comment, like the video if you liked it. If you didn't, that's cool too. And then let me know, if you have different thoughts about anything I talked about, or if you have questions. Like I said, just put them in the comments. And yeah, see you in the next one. We'll do the suspension and move on to doing some more fun stuff. Later.